Maya had always felt something was off about her in-laws' polite smiles and perfect dinners. But when she began falling violently ill after every meal, the subtle tension between them turned into something much darker and much more dangerous. Was her sickness just bad luck? Or was something more sinister happening behind closed doors? Before we get started, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more exciting content, and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Now, let's dive in. Maya stood at the mirror, running her fingers through her dark curls, trying to ease the slight tension she always felt before visiting David's parents. She loved her husband deeply, and though their life together was close to perfect, these family dinners cast a shadow over her happiness. Each time they went to Margaret and Richard's house, Maya felt like an outsider, even when they greeted her with open arms. "Maya, ready to go?" David's voice floated from the hallway. He appeared in the doorway, adjusting the sleeves of his dress shirt, flashing her the same warm smile that had made her fall in love with him. "Almost," she replied, glancing at her reflection one last time. She was dressed to fit the part, something Margaret would appreciate. Margaret was always commenting on appearances, never in a cruel way, but with a subtle undertone that left Maya wondering if she was truly being complimented or critiqued. "I know these dinners are important," she said, forcing a smile as she joined David, "but I'm always a little nervous. It feels like there's always something I'm missing." David laughed softly, placing a gentle hand on her back. "You're overthinking again. Mom and Dad love you. They're just a little old-fashioned, but they mean well." Maya nodded, though she wasn't sure if she believed that anymore. At first, she had attributed the strange tension to cultural differences. After all, she had grown up in a completely different environment than David. His family was well off, prestigious even, whereas she came from a modest background. But what had first seemed like harmless differences in perspective now felt like something deeper, something unspoken that hung in the air whenever she was around them. The car ride was quiet, with David humming along to the radio while Maya gazed out the window, her mind drifting back to the last family dinner. She had spent most of the night feeling queasy, her stomach churning not just from the food but from the uncomfortable conversations. Margaret had asked her, in what seemed like a passing comment, if she had ever thought about how her background might impact David's career. The question had hit Maya like a punch to the gut, but she had smiled through it, unsure how to respond. "Your background." It had sounded so clinical, like something that needed to be managed, something that might tarnish the shiny exterior of their perfect family. She hadn't told David about it. He was protective of her, and she didn't want to stir up unnecessary conflict. When they arrived at his parents' home, Margaret greeted them at the door with her usual crisp smile. "Maya, darling, you look lovely as always," she said, her eyes lingering on Maya's dress before flitting away. "Thank you, Margaret," Maya replied, returning the smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. Margaret's compliments always felt like backhanded approval, as if she were surprised every time Maya managed to meet her expectations. Richard joined them in the hallway, offering a warm handshake and an almost too polite, "Good to see you both." The house smelled of roast lamb and rosemary, the kind of meal Margaret prided herself on, always cooking something a bit too elegant for Maya's taste. The dinner started off as usual. Margaret and Richard dominated the conversation, discussing current events and family friends. Maya felt herself slipping into the background, as she often did at these gatherings. Margaret and Richard were masters of polite exclusion, never outright saying anything offensive, but always directing the conversation just slightly away from Maya, leaving her on the outskirts. Then came the food. The roast lamb was set in the center of the table, steaming and glistening under the chandelier lights. Maya glanced at her plate, feeling the familiar unease start to creep into her stomach. It had happened at nearly every dinner they'd had here. She would eat, everything would seem fine, and then halfway through the meal, her stomach would twist in knots. The first time, she had chalked it up to nerves, but as the pattern continued, she grew more concerned. Tonight, she tried to pace herself, taking smaller bites, sipping water in between. But as the meal progressed, the sensation began to creep in again. That slow, growing discomfort in her stomach, It started as a mild cramp, then escalated until she was gripping the edges of her chair, trying to keep a composed expression. "You're awfully quiet tonight, Maya," Margaret said, her voice cutting through the hum of conversation. "Everything all right?" Maya nodded, forcing a smile. "I'm fine. Just a little tired, I guess." David looked over at her with concern, his fork pausing midair. "Are you sure? You've been feeling off a lot after dinner lately." "I'm fine," Maya insisted, though she could feel the nausea rising in her throat. She didn't want to make a scene, didn't want to give Margaret or Richard any reason to think she couldn't handle these dinners. But the truth was, she wasn't fine. By the time dessert was served, a delicate lemon tart, Maya could barely keep her food down. She excused herself from the table, heading to the bathroom, where she leaned against the sink, breathing deeply. Her reflection in the mirror looked pale, her eyes wide with discomfort. What was going on? As she splashed water on her face, she heard a knock at the door. "Maya? Are you okay?" It was David. "I'm fine," she called back, her voice shaky. But she wasn't. This wasn't just bad luck. This wasn't just nerves. Something was happening, and she couldn't shake the feeling that it was connected to these family dinners. When she returned to the table, Margaret gave her a concerned smile. "Perhaps next time, I should make something a little lighter. You seem to have trouble with our dinners, dear." There it was again, that thinly veiled comment, that slight dig, as if Maya's body was rejecting more than just the food. As if she were rejecting them. Maya smiled, but inside her suspicion grew. She glanced at the dishes on the table, at the way Margaret's eyes flicked to her plate when she thought no one was looking. Something wasn't right, and she was determined to figure out what. The car ride home was quiet, with David casting worried glances at her every few minutes. "Maybe we should talk to a doctor about this. It's weird that it only happens when we're at my parents' house." Maya nodded, but inside, she knew it wasn't a doctor she needed to talk to. It was Margaret. As the days passed, Maya couldn't shake the growing suspicion gnawing at the back of her mind. Something was undeniably wrong, and the fact that it only happened at her in-laws' dinners couldn't be a coincidence. David, ever the loving husband, had suggested they take a break from visiting his parents, but Maya knew that avoiding the situation wasn't going to help. She needed to confront it, to confront them. The morning after their last dinner, Maya sat in their living room, curled up on the sofa with a cup of tea, her mind racing. She replayed the events of the night before, going over every detail, trying to find something, anything, that could explain why she felt so ill after eating at Margaret's house. Was it the food? But why would she only react at these dinners? She had eaten lamb, potatoes, and salads countless times before without any issue. It didn't make sense. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from her best friend, Imani, asking how she was doing. Imani had been her sounding board ever since Maya had started dating David, offering advice, support, and, sometimes much-needed reality checks. Maya sighed and texted back. "Maya, feeling off again after dinner at David's parents'. Starting to think it's not just the food. You need to trust your gut, girl. No pun intended. If you feel like something's wrong, maybe it is." But what could it be? "I can't imagine them doing anything to harm me. It's just a weird feeling I get." Don't underestimate people's hidden prejudices. Even if they don't say it, they might still feel it. Maya frowned at the message. Prejudice? Margaret and Richard had never been outright rude to her. Never said anything that would suggest they didn't approve of her. Sure, there were the subtle comments, the lingering looks, but could it really be more than that? Could they be acting on some deep-seated bias they hadn't voiced? Imani's words weighed heavily on her as the day went on. Maya had always tried to give people the benefit of the doubt, to believe that they weren't judging her based on her race or background. But she couldn't deny that there were moments, small but telling, that made her question how truly welcome she was in David's family. Later that afternoon, David returned from work, greeting her with a kiss on the forehead. He could sense her tension immediately. "You're still thinking about last night, aren't you?" he asked gently, sitting beside her on the couch. Maya nodded. "I don't know, David. I just can't shake this feeling. It's not normal to get sick like that every time we eat there. Something's wrong." David looked concerned, but he remained calm, as he always did. Maybe it's the ingredients your mom uses. We could talk to her and see if she's been using anything you might be allergic to. Allergic? Maya repeated, her eyebrows furrowing. I don't think that's it. I've never had issues with food before. Besides, it's not like she's serving exotic ingredients or anything. It's basic stuff, like lamb and vegetables. David sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know, babe. I hate seeing you like this. If you want, I can talk to her for you. I don't think she's doing anything on purpose, but maybe we can ask her to change the menu a bit. Maya forced a smile. David always saw the best in people, and she loved that about him, but she wasn't sure if simply changing the food was going to solve the problem. There was something deeper here, something that couldn't be fixed with a different recipe. No, it's okay, she said softly. I'll handle it. I just need to be sure first. David nodded, clearly wanting to help, but respecting her decision. All right. Just let me know if you need anything. Over the next few days, Maya became more observant, paying closer attention to every little detail when she visited her in-laws' house. She started to notice patterns. The way Margaret would always serve her food last, after everyone else had been served, or how Richard would barely make eye contact with her during dinner conversations. These weren't things she had noticed before, or perhaps she had noticed them, but had been too focused on keeping the peace to dwell on them. One evening, she decided to do some research. Sitting at her kitchen table, she opened her laptop and began looking into potential causes for her symptoms. Food intolerances, allergies, environmental factors, nothing seemed to fit. And then she stumbled upon something that made her pause. Certain ingredients, when used in specific combinations or in excess, could cause symptoms like nausea and stomach cramps, especially if someone had a sensitivity to them. Some of these ingredients were common in the kinds of dishes Margaret often prepared, but what caught Maya's attention was that the symptoms only occurred when these ingredients were used intentionally to trigger a reaction. Her heart skipped a beat. Could Margaret be doing this on purpose? No. It couldn't be. That was ridiculous, right? But the idea wouldn't leave her mind. Margaret was always in control of the kitchen, and she never let anyone else help with preparing the meals. Was it possible that she was subtly poisoning Maya, not enough to cause serious harm, but just enough to make her uncomfortable, to make her feel like she didn't belong? Maya felt a chill run down her spine. The thought was horrifying, but it was starting to make sense. The way Margaret's face would light up just a little too much when Maya excused herself from the table, the way Richard would seem relieved when she left early because she wasn't feeling well. Was this their way of pushing her away, of making her feel unwelcome without ever having to say it out loud? She needed to know for sure. The next time they were invited to dinner, Maya made a decision. She would attend, but this time she would bring her own dish. It was a subtle move, one that wouldn't draw too much attention, but it would give her control over what she was eating. If she didn't get sick after eating her own food, then she would have her answer. When she told David about her plan, he was supportive, though he didn't fully understand. Are you sure this is necessary? Mom and Dad aren't going to care if you bring your own food, but it might seem a little strange. I just need to try it, Maya replied, her voice steady. It's not that I don't trust them. I just want to see if it's the food that's causing the problem. David gave her a reassuring smile. Whatever makes you feel better. I'm with you. On the night of the dinner, Maya felt a mix of nerves and determination. As they walked into the house carrying a casserole she had made herself, Margaret raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Her smile was tight, her eyes scanning the dish with what looked like mild disapproval. I thought I was cooking tonight, Margaret said, her voice laced with a hint of something Maya couldn't quite place. You are, Maya said quickly, keeping her tone light. But I've been feeling off after dinner lately, so I thought I'd bring something a little gentler on my stomach. Hope that's okay. Margaret's smile never wavered, but there was a flicker of something behind her eyes. Of course, dear. Whatever makes you comfortable. Throughout the meal, Maya ate only from her own dish, carefully watching Margaret and Richard's reactions. They seemed unfazed at first, but as the night went on, Maya noticed subtle shifts. The way Margaret's smile became more strained, the way Richard kept glancing at her plate. For the first time in months, Maya didn't feel the familiar nausea creeping up on her. Her stomach was calm and her mind was clear. When they left that night, David commented on how much better she looked. See? Maybe it really was just something in the food. Maya smiled, but inside, she knew it was more than that. She had uncovered something darker, something that made her feel sick in an entirely different way. Maya sat at the edge of the bed that night, her mind racing as she reflected on the dinner. For the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't feel nauseous, no cramps, no dizziness, just an overwhelming clarity. Bringing her own dish had been the right move, and it revealed what she feared deep down, that Margaret's meals had something to do with her sickness. The realization was like a punch to the gut. She had wanted to believe that her discomfort was all in her head, that maybe it was stress or coincidence, but the evidence was becoming harder to ignore. Margaret's veiled smiles, Richard's cold stares, and now the fact that Maya felt perfectly fine after eating only the food she prepared herself. It was all too much to dismiss. She turned to David, who was already in bed, scrolling through his phone. He was her rock, her partner in everything, and she couldn't imagine her life without him. But now she faced a dilemma. Should she tell him what she suspected? Should she confront Margaret? Or should she continue to play along, pretending everything was fine for the sake of keeping the peace? David glanced over at her, noticing her silence. "You okay?" he asked, concern softening his voice. "You've been quiet since we got back." Maya forced a smile. "Just thinking. I'm glad I didn't get sick this time." He reached out, gently taking her hand in his. "See, maybe it really was just something in the food before. I knew it couldn't have been anything serious." She hesitated, wondering if now was the time to say something, but as she looked at him, she couldn't bring herself to do it. Not yet. David had always seen his parents as these perfect figures in his life, loving, supportive, and honorable. To suggest that Margaret could be intentionally harming her would shatter his image of them, and she wasn't sure if she was ready to bear the weight of that truth. "Yeah," she murmured, squeezing his hand. "Maybe you're right." But deep down, she knew that wasn't the case. The next few days passed in a blur, but Maya couldn't shake her growing unease. She began researching more about subtle forms of food tampering and poisoning, discovering that it was surprisingly easy to trigger mild reactions without leaving a trace. Margaret, with her years of culinary experience, could easily slip something into Maya's meals without anyone noticing. The thought made Maya's skin crawl. Determined to learn more, she decided to visit the family home again, but this time under a different pretense. She told David that she wanted to spend more time with Margaret, to get closer to her as a way of bonding. David, always supportive, thought it was a great idea. He even seemed excited that Maya was making an effort to strengthen her relationship with his mother. When she called Margaret and suggested the visit, Margaret's response was warm but guarded, as if she couldn't quite believe Maya's sudden interest in spending one-on-one time with her. "That sounds lovely, dear," Margaret had said over the phone, her voice smooth as ever. "We can have tea and chat. It'll be nice to spend time together, just the two of us." Maya agreed, but her true motive was to observe Margaret in the kitchen, to see if there was anything out of the ordinary when she prepared food. She didn't want to accuse her outright without proof, but her instincts were telling her that something was off. The following weekend, Maya arrived at the family home, her heart pounding in her chest as she walked up the front steps. Margaret greeted her with a smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm so glad you came," Margaret said, ushering her inside. "I've been meaning to have a proper chat with you. We don't get much time to talk during the family dinners, do we?" Maya nodded, trying to appear relaxed, even though her stomach was in knots. "Yeah, I thought it would be nice for us to spend some time together." Margaret led her to the kitchen, where she had already started preparing a light lunch. Maya watched as Margaret moved around the kitchen with practiced ease, chopping vegetables and stirring pots with a calm efficiency that spoke of years of experience. There was nothing overtly suspicious about the way she handled the food, but Maya couldn't shake the feeling that Margaret was aware of her scrutiny. "So, how have you been feeling lately?" Margaret asked casually, her back to Maya as she sliced a cucumber. David mentioned that you haven't been feeling well after dinners. Maya hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. Yeah, I've been having some stomach issues, but it's getting better. I brought my own food last time, and I felt fine. Margaret's knife paused for a split second before she resumed chopping. Oh? I hope you don't think it's anything to do with my cooking. I take pride in preparing healthy, balanced meals. There it was again, that veiled comment, the subtle suggestion that Maya's problems were her own, not Margaret's. Maya kept her voice steady. No, I don't think it's your cooking. I'm just trying to figure out what's been causing it. Margaret to face her, wiping her hands on a towel. Well, I hope you're not stressing too much about it. Stress can do terrible things to the body, you know? Sometimes we make ourselves sick without even realizing it. Maya smiled tightly, but inside she felt a chill. Margaret's words were layered with meaning, and it wasn't lost on Maya that she was being subtly blamed for her own illness. The conversation continued, with Margaret maintaining her polite facade, but Maya's mind was racing. She needed more evidence. As lunch was served, Maya noticed Margaret watching her carefully as she ate. There was something predatory in the way Margaret observed her, as if she was waiting for Maya to show some sign of discomfort. But this time, Maya ate sparingly, sticking mostly to the bread and salad, and she made sure to politely decline anything she hadn't seen Margaret prepare in front of her. After lunch, as Margaret cleared the table, Maya offered to help in the kitchen. It was her chance to get closer to the food, to see if there was anything unusual about the ingredients or the way Margaret stored things. As she moved around the kitchen, Maya noticed something strange. In the corner of one of the cupboards, hidden behind some jars of spices, was a small container with no label. "What's this?" Maya asked, holding up the container. Margaret's face tightened for a fraction of a second before she smiled. "Oh, that? Just a blend of spices I use for special dishes. Nothing you'd be interested in, I'm sure." Maya nodded, but her suspicion grew. Why hide something like that? She wanted to ask more questions, but she knew she had to tread carefully. Margaret was sharp, and Maya couldn't afford to tip her hand just yet. The rest of the afternoon passed uneventfully, but as Maya drove home, her mind was buzzing with possibilities. That unmarked container could be the key to everything. What if Margaret had been adding something to the food all along? Something that wouldn't be obvious but would make her sick. When she arrived home, David was waiting for her, eager to hear how the day had gone. "How was it?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her. Maya hesitated, not wanting to worry him just yet. "It was fine. We had a nice lunch, and I got to spend some time with her. Nothing out of the ordinary." David smiled, clearly relieved. "That's great. I'm glad you two are getting along." But Maya wasn't so sure. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that Margaret wasn't as innocent as she seemed. Something was going on, and Maya was determined to find out what. That night, as she lay in bed next to David, she made a decision. She couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. The next time they had dinner at Margaret's, she went to confront her, and this time she wouldn't back down. The tension had built to an unbearable point, and Maya knew that the next family dinner would be pivotal. For weeks, she had been slowly piecing together the truth, each fragment of suspicion pushing her closer to the inevitable confrontation with Margaret. She had stayed quiet for too long, unwilling to disrupt the delicate balance in her relationship with David. But the time had come to act. She couldn't ignore what was happening any longer. On the day of the next family dinner, Maya's nerves were electric. She could feel the weight of the decision she had made pressing down on her as she stood in front of the mirror, getting ready. Her heart pounded in her chest as she applied her makeup, her hands slightly trembling. David was in the other room, blissfully unaware of the storm that was brewing beneath the surface. "Ready to go, babe?" David called out, his voice light and casual. He had no idea what was coming. Maya took a deep breath, smoothing down her dress and forcing a smile. "Yeah, I'm ready." The car ride to his parents' house felt longer than usual, the silence between them heavy with the things Maya wasn't saying. David chatted casually about his day, completely oblivious to the battle raging inside her. She loved him deeply. and the thought of hurting him with what she was about to reveal tore at her. But she couldn't live in denial any longer. When they arrived at Margaret and Richard's house, the air felt charged with unspoken tension. Maya could sense it the moment they stepped through the door. Margaret greeted them with her usual polished smile, but there was something colder about it tonight, as if she could sense that Maya's tolerance for their games had run out. Richard was more aloof than usual, offering little more than a nod before retreating to his study. "Maya, you look lovely as always," Margaret said, her voice dripping with artificial warmth. "Come, let's get you both settled in for dinner. I've made your favorite tonight. Roast lamb, I know how much you enjoy it." Maya forced a smile, but inside her stomach churned at the thought of eating anything prepared by Margaret. She had already decided that she wouldn't touch a bite of it. Tonight was about answers, not keeping up appearances. They sat down to dinner, and as the meal began, Maya watched Margaret closely. There was something almost performative about the way Margaret served the food. Her movements deliberate, each dish carefully placed in front of them. When it was Maya's turn, Margaret paused for just a moment before setting the plate in front of her, a faint smile playing on her lips. "There you go, dear. I hope it's to your liking," Margaret said, her tone sweet but her eyes calculating. Maya glanced at the plate, the rich aroma of the lamb rising to meet her, but she didn't touch it. Instead, she took a deep breath and looked up, meeting Margaret's gaze head-on. It was now or never. "Margaret," Maya began, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions brewing inside her. "I need to talk to you about something that's been bothering me for a while." David looked up from his plate, surprised by the sudden seriousness in her tone. "What's going on?" he asked, his brow furrowed. Margaret's smile faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly. "Oh, what's the matter, dear?" Maya set her fork down and leaned forward, her heart racing. "I've been getting sick after every meal we've had here for months. At first I thought it was just a coincidence, but then I started to notice a pattern. It only happens when I eat the food you prepare." The room went still, the air thick with the weight of Maya's words. David's eyes widened, his fork frozen in midair. "Maya, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that something's wrong," Maya continued, her voice firm. "Every time we eat here, I get sick, but when I bring my own food, I'm fine. I've been trying to figure out what's causing it, and I think I know." Margaret's face remained calm, but Maya could see the flicker of something dark beneath the surface. "Are you suggesting that I've been doing something to harm you, Maya?" Margaret asked, her voice cool and controlled. Maya didn't flinch. "I'm not suggesting it. I'm saying that I believe you've been deliberately adding something to the food that's making me sick." David's face drained of color, his mouth opening in shock. "Maya, that's crazy. My mom would never." "I know it sounds unbelievable," Maya interrupted gently, turning to David. "But think about it. I've been fine every other time, except when we eat here. Something isn't right." Margaret's eyes narrowed, her polished exterior starting to crack. "This is absurd," she snapped, her voice laced with venom. "I have done nothing but welcome you into this family with open arms. To accuse me of something like this it's outrageous." Maya stood her ground. "I've been patient, Margaret. I've ignored the comments, the looks, all the subtle ways you've tried to make me feel like I don't belong. But I can't ignore this. I know what's been happening, and I'm done pretending it's all in my head." David looked between his mother and Maya, his confusion turning into anger. "Mom, what's going on? Is any of this true?" Margaret's eyes flashed with something close to panic, but she quickly masked it with indignation. "Of course not. How could you believe such nonsense? Maya is clearly being paranoid." Maya's voice softened, but her resolve remained strong. "I don't want to believe it either, but I can't ignore what's been happening. And I found something in the kitchen during our last visit, an unmarked container, hidden away. I know you've been adding something to the food." Margaret's face blanched, and for the first time she faltered. That's just a spice blend I use for special dishes. You're overreacting." Maya shook her head. "I'm not. I'm done ignoring the signs. You've been trying to get rid of me in your own way, haven't you?" There was a long silence as Margaret stared at Maya, her mask of civility slipping further with each passing second. Finally, Margaret spoke, her voice low and bitter. You don't belong in this family, Maya. I've tried to be patient, but you just don't fit. David deserves better, someone who can elevate him, not drag him down. David's face twisted in shock and disbelief. Mom, what are you saying? Margaret stood up, her composure shattering completely. I'm saying that she doesn't belong here. You could have had anyone, David, but you chose her. And now you're stuck with someone who doesn't understand our world, our way of life. She's different, and it's only a matter of time before you realize it. The room was deathly quiet. Maya's heart pounded in her chest, but she felt an odd sense of calm wash over her. Finally, the truth was out, laid bare for everyone to see. Margaret's prejudice, her veiled insults, the subtle ways she had tried to push Maya away. It all made sense now. David, pale and shaken, stood up slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. I can't believe this. How could you do this to Maya? To me. Margaret's face softened, but it was too late. David, I was only trying to protect you. You don't understand how difficult it is to— No, David interrupted, his voice filled with quiet fury. You don't get to justify this. I love Maya. She's my wife, and if you can't accept that, then maybe we need to rethink this relationship. Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but David didn't waver. He turned to Maya, his face filled with remorse. I'm so sorry. I didn't see it. I should have known. Maya shook her head, placing a hand on his arm. It's not your fault. I didn't want to believe it either. Richard, who had been silent until now, finally spoke up, his voice heavy with regret. Margaret, I think it's time we leave them alone. Margaret said nothing, but the devastation on her face was clear. She had lost. As they left, the weight of the moment settled over the room, but Maya felt a strange sense of relief. The confrontation had been brutal, but necessary. The truth, however painful, was out. The days following the confrontation were some of the hardest Maya had ever endured. The weight of the truth, now fully out in the open, hung in the air like a fog that refused to lift. David had barely spoken since that night. He spent most of his time reflecting, his mind undoubtedly torn between his love for his wife and the harsh reality of his mother's betrayal. Maya knew it wasn't easy for him, and she gave him the space he needed, even though the silence between them felt like an ocean widening with each passing day. Maya herself felt a mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and an overwhelming sense of loss. She had always known deep down that Margaret never truly accepted her. But hearing those words spoken aloud had cut deeper than she'd expected. The realization that someone could harbor such deep-seated prejudice, even in such subtle ways, was a harsh reminder of the challenges she would continue to face. But she hadn't expected Margaret to go to such lengths to make her feel unwanted. The hurt stung, but Maya also felt a sense of vindication. The truth was out now, and the facade was gone. On the third day after the confrontation, David finally broke the silence. They were sitting in the living room, the soft glow of the evening sun filtering through the curtains, casting a warm light over the room. David sat beside her on the couch, his hands resting on his knees, his posture tense. He hadn't touched his phone or the remote, as if all the distractions in the world couldn't keep him from the thoughts swirling in his head. I don't know where to start, he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. I can't believe she did this. Maya looked at him, her heart aching for the pain he was feeling. She placed a hand gently on his arm, offering him the comfort she knew he desperately needed. David, I know this is hard. I never wanted it to come to this. He shook his head, his eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and anger. I feel like I've been blind this whole time. I should have seen it. I should have noticed the way she treated you, the way she made you feel. I thought she was just trying to adjust, but now I realize that she was trying to push you away all along. Maya nodded, understanding his conflict. It wasn't your fault. She's your mother, and of course you wanted to believe the best in her. I didn't want to believe it either. I kept hoping that maybe I was wrong, that maybe I was overreacting, but it became impossible to ignore. David's face tightened as he struggled to find the right words. What she did, it's unforgivable. I don't know how to move forward from this. I love you, Maya. You're my wife, and nothing will change that. But I don't know how to deal with her anymore. How do I even begin to reconcile this? Maya took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. She knew how much David loved his family, and asking him to sever that bond would be cruel. But at the same time, she couldn't ignore what had happened. Margaret had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, and the consequences of that were undeniable. "I think," Maya said slowly, "that what happens next is up to you. I've made my peace with what Margaret did. It hurt, and it's going to take time for me to fully heal from it. But I know that what she did says more about her than it does about me. She tried to make me feel small, like I didn't belong, but I know my worth, and I know that I do belong, with you, in this life we're building together." David's eyes softened as he listened, clearly moved by her strength. "I'm so sorry, Maya. You should never have had to go through this. I should have protected you." Maya shook her head gently. "This wasn't something you could have stopped. Margaret had her own demons to deal with, and unfortunately, she let them take over. But I don't want this to be something that drives a wedge between you and your family. That's not what I want." David frowned, his brow furrowing. "But how can I forgive her for this? How can I even face her after knowing what she's done?" Maya leaned closer, taking his hand in hers. "It's not about forgiveness, at least not right now. It's about boundaries. You need to set the terms for how your relationship with her moves forward. She needs to understand that what she did was wrong, and that it hurt both of us. If she can accept that and genuinely apologize, maybe there's a way to rebuild something. But it's going to take time." David looked down at their joined hands, his expression thoughtful. "And if she can't? If she doesn't apologize?" Maya's voice was firm. "Then you need to decide what's best for you. I'll support whatever decision you make, but I won't subject myself to her treatment again. I won't put myself in a position where I'm constantly questioning whether I'm being sabotaged or made to feel less than." David nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of her words. "You're right. I need to talk to her. I need to confront her about all of this." The next day, David made the call. It was a difficult conversation, one that Maya knew would be emotionally charged. She gave him space as he spoke to his mother, pacing the living room while he stood in the kitchen, his voice tense but controlled. From the fragments of the conversation she overheard, it was clear that Margaret was defensive at first, but David didn't back down. "I don't care what your intentions were, Mom," he said firmly at one point. "What you did was wrong, and I can't just pretend like it didn't happen. If you want to have a relationship with me, with us, you need to understand that." There was a long pause, and then David's voice softened. "I love you, but I'm not going to tolerate you treating Maya like this. She's my wife. She's part of this family, and if you can't accept that, then I don't know how we move forward." When the call ended, David looked exhausted but resolute. "She said she needs time to think," he told Maya, sinking into the couch beside her. "I don't know if she'll ever fully accept what she's done, but at least she knows where I stand." Maya nodded, wrapping her arms around him. "That's all you can do. The rest is up to her." In the weeks that followed, Margaret kept her distance. David and Maya began to heal, their bond strengthening as they worked through the aftermath of the confrontation. Maya had feared that the situation might drive a wedge between them, but instead, it brought them closer. David's unwavering support and willingness to stand up for her only deepened her love for him. One afternoon, months after the confrontation, Maya received a call from Richard. His voice was quieter than usual, more measured. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for everything. Margaret and we didn't handle things the way we should have. I can't speak for her, but I wanted you to know that I regret how we treated you." Maya was quiet for a moment, surprised by the apology. "Thank you, Richard," she finally said. "It means a lot to hear you say that." "Margaret, she's struggling," Richard continued. "But I think, deep down, she knows she was wrong. It's just going to take some time." Maya nodded, even though Richard couldn't see her. "I understand. I hope, for all our sakes, that she can come to terms with it." As she hung up the phone, Maya felt a sense of peace wash over her. It wasn't a perfect resolution, and Margaret's apology, if it ever came, would take time. But Maya had found closure in knowing that the truth had come to light and that she had stood her ground. She had faced prejudice and overcome it, not with anger or revenge, but with grace and strength. Karma, Maya realized, didn't always come in the form of punishment. Sometimes, it was simply the quiet satisfaction of knowing that the truth had been revealed, and that those who had wronged her would have to live with their actions. The rest, as always, was up to the universe. And as Maya and David continued to build their life together, stronger than ever, she knew that they would face whatever came next, together. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Click on the video now to watch. We appreciate your support, and we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments.